doesn't mean that doesn't mean taking away from what someone's going through, because what's a mountain to me may be an anthill to you and vice versa. At the bottom, it says, I spent quite a bit of time during that summer of being exposed thinking about how to deal with hurtful people. When I figured out I had to deal with first was the fear of other people's thoughts, opinions, whispers, and comments. And I think that is a super big struggle for me. I wrote down 3 areas. When I was at my old church, our youth pastor's wife had passed away, and it was just a bad situation. We were very close to their family, and some of the family members had ended up saying just some very hurtful things. And I remember after that, I just put a wall up and I was like, I'm not helping anybody ever again, because this hurts too bad when your intentions are good and helpful, and then it's just like someone attacks you and takes your intentions completely different. And I remember probably for a year I carried that and not really realizing how much I let it affect me. I remember one night after revival, I went and grabbed my pastor's wife and I was like, my heart felt like a cement block was sitting on it. I could not breathe, and I knew it was conviction. It was after everybody had left. I got down on the altar and the Lord let me know that I was just carrying around bitterness, and I had carried it for a year and not even realized it. And just getting that right with the Lord, of realizing that people who are hurting will hurt others. And you can't just quit helping people. You can't quit being compassionate. You can't quit going out of the way to be kind, and remembering you could be in the same place. You could easily hurt someone else. I say my second thing, and some of you don't know me very well, but my husband and I have been married for 7 years, and we had been trying to have a baby for about 4.5. And it really, it was fine. I had moments of up and downs, but the Lord really helped us with it. And I think later on, I think in the second chapter, she mentions that as well, just how those things can grow you and help you become more like the Lord and closer to the Lord. But I remember there were times, even this year at school, someone would ask me, well, do you not want kids? And I'm like stab in the heart. Like, yes, we love kids. And so just those things, and nobody meant anything by it. Just at times, just certain way people would word things were so hurtful and would cause you then. I remember telling Chris a couple of times, I'm like, I don't understand why the Lord is letting us go through this when other couples don't have to have these conversations. And I know that sounds very silly, because we all go through different things. But in my brain, it's like, Lord, why? Like, why do we have to have this struggle and have hard conversations where we're both in tears and knowing that other couples don't have that? And that was a very limited view, because I know everybody goes through different things. And then the third one, I would say there's just a real struggle with people's opinions, was just working in Christian schools and people's opinion. And I think that could go for putting your kid in public school, putting them in homeschool. Just people have their opinion about your life all the time. And so remembering just to take it back to the truth of God's word, and knowing that that truth is freeing. And I think the biggest thing, which I agree with her on page 59, is it has to start with me. It has to start with the Lord working in my heart and teaching me things about himself, about myself, and just about others, and showing compassion and changing my prayer to not, Lord, change them, but Lord, change me. Show me how to help in those situations. Show me how to handle it with grace and with peace. And if you know me, my mouth sometimes gets me in trouble. I'm very quick to just voice my opinion instead of waiting on the Lord to do some of those things. So I just think it's a learning process throughout. I'm going to try to go faster. Page 60, 2 things in the middle of the page. She quoted the verse about conquering fear, and how where you don't have to have a spirit of fear. And I think fear can be conquered by identifying lies. And she goes on to talk about that a good bit, because the enemy wants us paralyzed and compromised by what ifs, which is one of my biggest issues. What if this happens? What if this happens? Opinions. If I feel like someone's upset with me or thinks ill of me, like I have a really hard time with it. And Chris is like, Ashley, they don't think that. And I'm like, I need to text them and make sure they don't think that. Like, I just need to check, and like, it would help my mind. Misunderstandings, those things. I think for me personally, one of the best Bible studies I ever did was Lies Women Believe. And it was when I was in college. And if you look at page 65 at the top, it says, whatever statement was spoken to you that came against the truth must be called a lie. And you can only combat with God's word. And I remember that I wrote down, it was some of these things that were in the book, like you are enough, you are set apart, all these things. And I wrote down, like I physically wrote down lies that I believed about myself. And then I went back with the truth of God's word and wrote what he said about me. And I think that was the most beneficial thing I've ever done, just as an emotional woman, was to take those thoughts and take them captive and write down scripture that combated those things. So you can't identify the lies unless you're reading the truth. Like, it's simple as that. You're going to stay in those lies until you start reading the truth and spending time in those. So the end of that chapter on page 66 is talking about the people who are hurtful. And it says, aren't they broken, vulnerable people with their own hurts and heartbreaks? Might you have compassion for them? So I think that's just the challenge from that chapter. The next chapter about paintings and people, I feel like it kind of builds on the same thing. If you look at page 75, she's still talking in the middle of the page. Remember, while God converts with truth, the enemy paralyzes with fear, or he perverts the truth. God wants us transformed, but Satan wants us paralyzed. And I thought about that verse in Romans about be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And to renew it means to resume after an interruption. So maybe you had a life-shattering situation that really just did take you to the dust, broke you completely. So get back to being renewed by the Lord. Another one is to reestablish a relationship and then give fresh life or strength to. And I thought that was great, because how many times do we mindlessly just live in our disappointments instead of spending time with the Lord and really regaining that renewal of our minds? So on page 76, I think the quote that probably stuck out to a lot of us is, I am not good enough. And I wrote in here that in reality, we really aren't good enough. And I feel like we kind of have to come to terms with that, knowing that. I think one of the biggest verses the Lord has given me with that is 2 Corinthians 3:5. And I wanted to actually read that one, so I didn't misquote it. But it's such a lie of the enemy to tell us over and over again that you are enough. You are enough. We've heard lies like follow your heart, do what feels good, do what makes you happy. And while those things sound great, that's not the way God created us. 2 Corinthians 3:5 says, not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything of ourselves, but our sufficiency is of God. And I just thought, how true. Like, he created us to depend on him. We're not good enough on our own. And if we continue to try to be good enough on our own, we're going to have those moments like she talks about where we just want to quit. I mean, there are times where I'll just look at Chris and I just feel like I'm failing as a teacher, as a wife, as a daughter, as a friend. And he's like, you're not. And then it's like, okay, Ashley, you have your mind on what you're doing and you're trying to do it in your own strength instead of relying on his strength. So I feel like in reality, just knowing and accepting that we'll never be good enough. It is literally just by the grace of God. And then praying, and she made choices on here. It says, sometimes we watch TV because nothing in our parenting book seems to be working. We settle for the ease of Facebook instead of more challenging work of digging into God's book. And therefore, then we just keep on that spiraling path of not good enough. And then on page 77, it says, we are imperfect, but we are unfinished. And I think that's such a good, simple statement. We are, like the little kid's song says, he's still working on us to really bring about his bigger picture. And she says that on page 79. In the middle of the page, if he can distract us, talking about Satan, with a negative narrative of not good enough, we will miss the meta narrative, the grand overarching story of redemption in which God intends for us all to play. And I read a book last year called Jesus Over Everything, and literally the entire book was about that. how there is a meta narrative to our life that's really just God's redemption plan. And we should see that in every aspect of our lives. But if we are focusing on those disappointments and feeling like the devil is telling us we're not good enough and living in that, then we're not living in that redemptive state that the Lord has promised us. And I know that's easier said than done a lot of times. On page 80, it says, we take the comfort of God we've received in the midst of our disappointments and use it to bring comfort to others. And I don't think Miss Julianne would mind me telling this, but Chris and I were talking a lot about this week. And I was actually telling him that one of the statements she had made had kind of bothered me. I think it was last week, but I told him that I really loved what Abby had said about the fact that sometimes like our situations are just not going to be good. Like, and I feel like sometimes we just think everything's always going to work out for good. And I'm not negating what the Bible says, like he will work all things out for good. But I told Chris, I was like, when his dad passed away, I'm like, I just don't see good. Like, yes, eventually your dad's in heaven. He's no longer addicted to drugs. You know, like there is good, but you wish he would have just been better here. And Chris made the comment, he said, yes, he said, but I feel like the best thing that came out of that was the fact that Joshua and Samuel's dad had passed away not very long after that. And then Chris just got to really talk to them and share that with them. And so that was just a reminder, I think, of you just never know what God's doing. When I was in middle school and high school, I struggled really, really bad with anxiety. I mean, like really bad. And that was something the Lord used really just to draw me closer to him. And then through that, I've been able to talk to my kids at school about it. I've been able to talk to other people about it and just try to be a help. And I think sometimes those disappointments and things we go through are not for us necessarily. They are for him to get the glory, whether that be in that situation or whether it be later on where we can help others. And I think that is just the point she drives home on page 83. It says, when people see us, do they see the compassion of their creator? So when they're seeing us, are they seeing that there's someone who's walking through trials, yet is still kind and compassionate to others? And the last thing on page 84, it says, these seasons of suffering are not for nothing. They will grow you. They will shape you. They will soften you. They will allow you to experience God's comfort and compassion. But you will find life-giving purpose and meaning when you allow God to take your personal experiences and comfort others. You will be able to share a unique hope because you know exactly what it feels like to be them. And I thought, what a treasure that God could take something totally awful and turn it into something beautiful. So that's it.
That was so good, Ashley. I love that. She reminded us of so much truth. And like you said, like sometimes when our mind gets out of whack and we're believing those lies, we have to combat them with truth. So thank you for that. Thank you for reminding us of all that. I did think of one thing I wanted to share that's helped me, kind of going back to the opinions that people have about you. Oh my goodness, I really care what people think about me to a fault. Like, I guess I'm a people pleaser. So I was talking with my therapist and I told her, I'm struggling with this one person and what she thinks about me. And I don't really know why I care, but I do. And she said, Abby, their opinion of you is not as important as your strength. And what she meant by that was, if you're so hyper focused and like trying to do everything you can to make them like you, you're going to be paralyzed by that and not have the strength that God wants you to have to do the things that actually matter. So, I mean, that's easy for me to say and then just go on. But now we have to kind of put that into practice and think, that really doesn't matter. We can't control what they think of you. So you just kind of have to focus on the strength that God has given you in the other areas of your life. I feel like maybe not, but that was just really helpful to me. So I wanted to share that. But again, Ashley, that was so good. Thank you for sharing. And I don't know if anybody kind of caught on, the people that don't know her, but can I tell them your little secret? She's having a baby and I'm so excited. I call it my little Muffin. She's Muffin's mom and Muffin's dad. So that's so awesome. And God answered her prayer with a yes. And we're so thankful for that. But Amanda, it is now your time. I'm excited to hear what you got for our last chapter.
Hey, y'all. All right. So I had chapter 6 and it was called A Little Too Long and A Lot Too Hard. And she started this chapter by saying that she thinks it was important to note at this point in the book that she doesn't know when or how her circumstances are going to be restored. It's kind of like she just wants to pause and be like, I really don't know how all this is going to end. And so I'm going to skip through and just share a few quotes and just kind of what the Lord spoke to me. And so I thought this quote was really good on page 93. It says, usually the most disappointing realities come from the most realistic expectations. An unmet longing from a realistic expectation is such a searing pain within a human heart. And I think we could all agree about that. Like, it's not some crazy out there kind of thing that really affects us, that usually, yeah, we might get a little bit disappointed, but those things that kind of turn us to dust, like Ashley shared last week, usually they are the most realistic expectations in your life. So that really stuck out with me. I really agreed with that. And then on page 95, she said, that's why I feel compelled to write this chapter from a very uncertain, untidy place. I know I must walk through God's process before I see his fulfilled promise. She said, I think I already said that in a previous chapter, but it's worth repeating. So she says it's all relative in the scope of your own life, and God's promises aren't just for certain people at a certain low point. His hope extends into any and every size pit or pothole. And she said, don't think just if your situation isn't catastrophic that you shouldn't bring it to our discussion here, because pain is pain. All right, so then I'm going to skip a little bit to page 99. And well, actually 98. Okay, so she said, I know he's placed people and things around me with great intentionality to assure me I'm not alone on this tightrope journey. And she said, so I'll look around for the evidence of his presence. And that's when the Lord spoke to me in this chapter, and he brought back the story of Ruth and Boaz. And I know most of y'all are familiar in that, but that verse in Ruth chapter 2, verse 16, and it's where Boaz tells his men, he says, and let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and lead them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. And she said, so we have to look around for evidence of his presence. And that's what really spoke to me during this chapter, because she compares it to being on a tightrope, and she's saying that almost like when you're in the middle, you're like in the scariest place of all, because you really can't see the outcome. You don't know how it's all going to end. So my takeaway was like that during those times when we feel like that, we have to be intentional to look for God's handfuls of purpose in our lives. And on page 99, she said, God is in often overlooked places. We don't have to find him. God is not far from him. We just have to make the choice to see him and rightly attribute to him the good that does exist. She said, I truly believe what keeps us on the path of long suffering instead of veering off in the dangerous direction of wallowing is to wake up with great expectation of these little reminders of God's goodness. And I thought about Ruth, because she was in the middle. She was in the in-between. She had lost her husband. She had come to a foreign land. She didn't know how her story was going to end. But then right in the middle of all this, she finds those handfuls of purpose that Boaz left for her. And even Naomi recognized that. And it was a reminder to her that God had not forgotten her. And I just thought that for this chapter, that's so important to remember, like when you are in those dust seasons and you cannot see the end of how something might work or may turn out, that we have got to intentionally look for God's goodness and choose to see that. And I'm just kind of sharing, I was going to say this to the end, but I think it fits right here. So of course, I actually read this is the third time I've read my chapter. So I read it after our call last Thursday, because I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. Lord, you got to help me, give me something for these ladies, because I don't take it lightly being able to share on these calls. And when it hit me about just having to look for those handfuls of purpose when we're in the in-between. I mean, we always should, don't get me wrong, but I think they're especially important in those in-between seasons. And I was reminded, some of y'all know this, some of y'all don't, but I have 6 children, and my oldest is on the autism spectrum. And that goes to one of those, time back to that quote. I have it in front of me about those disappointing realities come from the most realistic expectations. Because, I think like it's a realistic expectation to think you're going to have children one day if you want children. And then when you struggle with that, that brings disappointment if it doesn't go the way you think, whatever that is. Well, for me, you kind of picture your kids growing up like with your hopes and dreams. So like of what you had pictured for them, just in our nature, So I was going through a really hard time. This was about a year and a half or so ago. And I didn't really have a lot of people in my circle that had children on the autism spectrum, or really even children with disabilities, except for my father-in-law. He does, my husband's sister, he does have a sister with cerebral palsy. So anyways, I was just really struggling and thinking that there was this particular lady that I really wanted to talk to, because she was like a mom of 8, homeschool mom. I looked up to her. She loved the Lord. And she had a child with a severe brain trauma injury, wheelchair bound. So I was going to this training out to Arizona, and like only the Lord knew this. Like she was going to be one of the like 10 or 12 trainers, however many that week. Only the Lord knew that in my heart, I had a longing to talk to her. I didn't really share that with anybody. I was more like, I knew I was going to get some good training, but I just kept saying in my heart, man, Lord, if I could just talk to this lady, I just feel like she could help me. And I'll circle back to that at the end. But anyways, y'all, this was just a handful of purpose in my life, because the friend that I was set to fly with out there, her flight, they wouldn't let her board. They said she wasn't there in time. So I had to fly all the way to Arizona by myself. I'm not that big of a traveler. So I was really scared. So I'm already doing something like way outside of my comfort zone. I'm amazed I didn't just like run off the plane at this point, going by myself. So y'all, we get there to that airport, and I'm just like a little mouse lost in there, just like, Lord, I'm going to have to go find a taxi or whatever you call them. I know one of my friends is laughing at me now, what is it? Uber? Okay. Yeah. One of those. I'm like to do that by myself, y'all. I'm coming out of the bathroom, honestly, just wanting to cry. And this lady, her name's Krista, that I'd wanted to talk to, literally almost bump into her. Like she came in from a completely different state. I think it was Minnesota at the time, on a completely different plane. And we start chatting. I had met her in the past, and we were Facebook friends, but we really didn't know each other. So lo and behold, she ended up flying by herself, and we ended up getting an Uber together and having lunch together. And that was such, I mean, one of those things like it made me cry, because I knew the Lord just did that for me. And when I think about a handful of purpose, that's what the Lord used that in my life. And y'all, not only did I get to Uber with her, I got to share a meal with her. And then later that week, the Lord let me sit with another one of the trainers whose oldest son is also on the autism spectrum, around the exact same age as my son. And it just did my heart so good, because I came back just knowing that it's like, you're not forgotten, but when you can see those handfuls of purpose in your life, the Lord just reminds you, like, I see all of this, like you're not forgotten. And so that was kind of like my prayer, just when I was thinking about this, that you'll look for handfuls of purpose in your life when you're really struggling. And who knows, maybe this book club could even be one of those handfuls of purpose in your life. But kind of going off on a tangent here, but I was thinking about that the other day, like, why was I even wanting to talk to her, really? Like, I wasn't looking for like some incredible like answer or life-changing thing. And y'all, it just hit me. It was because like I knew that she knew what it was like to not have expectations for your child met. And we actually talked about that on the thing. I didn't know that in the beginning, that's why I was kind of like seeking to talk to her. But I think it was because at that point in my life, I needed somebody that knew exactly what I was walking through. And that's what I want to think right now. Like, if you are in a dust season, like, I want you to think, what purpose might your pain lead you to? If you're in that dust season, if you're in that dust season, sometimes you just need to talk to somebody else that's in that same season. And it's not that you're looking for all the answers, in other words, but if you just want to know, somebody knows exactly how you feel. And because that in and of itself can be an encouragement from the Lord. Okay, so that was like one of my biggest takeaways. I'm going to try to get back on track, and let's see, let me skip over to page 101. Okay, so she said not only is his presence process, but there's also purpose in the process. And I don't think I saw that come through in the chat comment earlier, and I was like, oh, she's going to talk a little bit about what I'm talking about. So there not only is his presence in the process where we can see those handfuls of purpose, we have to look for them though, be intentional about them. There's also purpose in the process. All right, so kind of like Ashley was saying, it's just neat how this came together with what I've been studying in my Bible reading, because I've been going through Genesis and I've been reading about Joseph the last couple of days. And so this reminded me so much of Joseph, about his purpose. Okay, hold on, I skipped something. I want to go back to this. Okay, so on page 101, y'all, I don't know about y'all, but the first time I read this like made me cry. This is when she's at her counseling session, and the counselor rips open the frame and gives her the purple heart. I was just sitting there squalling by myself. She said, if God gave out purple hearts, you would absolutely receive this high honor. What you are going through won't be for nothing. Your hurt will not be wasted. It will be for the saving of many lives. And that's what it just reminded me so much of Joseph, because I believe when he was 17, he was put in the pit, and it wasn't until he was 30, I believe, that he was put ruler over Egypt. So Joseph, during those 13 years, he's like really in that in-between season. He's in this suffering. He's in this dust process. He doesn't know his future. He doesn't know the outcome of this. So Joseph, during those 13 years, he may not have understood the purpose of his suffering, but I believe he had faith that there was one. And I think that's where we have to be right now. Like, even if we don't understand this dust process or ultimately what God's doing, we have to have faith that there is a purpose. And, it kind of like what Ashley was saying in the beginning. Honestly, Joseph did one day see the purpose, but we're not necessarily guaranteed that. We might not never know until heaven, truly the purpose. But he did see it. It was just like 13 years later. But so by faith, we know God is working good, even in the unseen. So that part just really spoke to me. And, just from a personal level, because Abby kind of made a little comment about like when she assigned us chapters, like kind of who she thought would, be a good fit for this chapter. And I'm like, why don't you think I was a good fit for this chapter? And I'm like, yeah, this was perfect for me, because, just being honest, when you have a child with disabilities, you might not ever see the purpose of that. In other words, it is. I feel like I'm going to kind of be in the in-between as far as that situation's concerned, for a long time. But I believe that God's going to give me handfuls of purpose, and I got to look for those. And I believe he does have a purpose. I just have to trust, even though I may see it, but may not see it right now. But, I do have those thoughts, sometimes like, is he going to live at home forever with us? And there's different little milestones that sometimes you think you're doing okay on that tightrope, like you're trusting the Lord, you're seeing these things happen that God's not forgotten you, and then maybe a milestone comes up and it just, that gut hits you like a gut punch, and it all comes back, and I think kind of realizing too that is natural. And I feel like sometimes I put unrealistic expectations on myself. I feel like what Ashley talked about in that last chapter, just really being okay, realizing that you're not going to have all the answers. You're not ever going to do everything right. And that we have to trust the Lord, that he's working in us, that we are imperfect, but his work is unfinished, and we can trust that. So I think that was most of what I had. I know we're close to being out of time, but at the end, she said, he's far more interested in your being prepared than in your being comfortable. And there is a purpose to the process, and it's called preparation. And usually the Lord is pretty much always during these processes, he's usually preparing for you for something down the road, even though we may not always realize it at the time. So she ended by saying, keep looking for his presence in the process. Like I like to call it, those handfuls of purpose. And so, yeah, tonight, maybe think, if you are in a dust season, what purpose might your pain lead you to? And she said, when you ask yourself those questions, like, how is the Lord trying to use this in my life? How is he trying to make me more like him through this? Or maybe he's making me want to have more compassion for others. That's being kingdom minded, when we can kind of step back and get out of our feelings, and think about what his purpose in that. When you do that, you're choosing to be kingdom minded. And sometimes we have to do that. So that's all I've got. I think I want to open it up and see if anybody wanted to share any takeaways from these last couple of chapters, anything that just really spoke to you. Y'all unmute yourselves, because I feel like hearing from other people is like what makes this special. So anybody want to share anything? Y'all just unmute yourself.
If nobody has anything, we'll wait just a couple minutes. You can feel free to interrupt me if you want to talk. But that was so good, Amanda. Thank you for being honest and sharing your heart, because I know that's so hard to be vulnerable with, especially situations you're currently going through. And like how she said, you may not see how it's going to end, but you're still being so faithful and looking for those handfuls of purpose in the process. And oh, it's so encouraging. And I love hearing your personal perspective of the chapter, because I have my own takeaway from it, but it's really cool to hear everyone else's. So one more chance. Anybody else have something they want to add before we wrap up tonight?
I just want to tell Amanda, I think it's really cool how the Lord can take things with her situation and use it really to bless other people, because Weston is such a blessing to everyone he meets. His personality, his smile, his just outgoingness. And I think that's part of just who he is, and how the Lord uses him to bring so much joy to us. And he may not make some of those milestones. I really think the Lord is going to save him very soon. And it's just encouraging to see he is such a bubbly, and there's no telling how the Lord is going to use that in his way, in his time. And I'm really excited to see it.
Well, thank you. You're made me cry. I did remind of one more thing I was going to share with y'all. This was I guess a little over a year ago. Sometimes you keep these feelings all inside, you're scared to expose them, to tell other people, And I did mention that Josh's sister has cerebral palsy. And, Ashley, and she talks about in this book with Sharon, that sometimes you ask, why, Lord? You get to thinking wasn't that enough? He had a handicapped sister growing up. I've seen his parents take care of her, been faithful and all those things. But from the flesh side, sometimes you think, why? And even from my husband's side, I know what it was like for him growing up. And sometimes so I found myself in a situation, and what's crazy, y'all, is sometimes this is a process, because I felt like I was crushed when I first got that diagnosis for him, but I was trusting the Lord. I felt okay, you know what I'm saying? But I guess maybe later, as the years went on, those fears and doubt, and honestly, just lies of Satan creeping in. And I'd got to a place where a year and a half ago where I was starting to have a lot of doubts, And I remember I was walking outside with Josh, and that's my husband, in between church services. And I was telling him, I've just been so full of doubt, just struggling, trusting the Lord with this. And I admitted to him that it just bothers me, that you grew up in a situation with a handicapped child. And I'll just poured my heart out to him. And y'all, that night, the Lord saved two of my kids. no, not Weston yet, but like my second son and my first daughter. Totally unexpected, but it was like one of those. And this was like one of those, I didn't see coming, because you're like, how they start getting closer to the teenagers, like stubborn and stuff. You're like, oh Lord, it might be a long time before you say this one. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'd already been having those thoughts in my mind, And so like the very day that I'm like confessing to the Lord my unbelief and how I've been doubtful and all these things, he goes and saves 2 of my kids that night. And that's one of those handful of purpose. I feel like a milestone that when I am struggling, you can look back, and just like Ruth and Naomi knew she wasn't forgotten, it's like the Lord knows I see you. But like I said, not only 1, but 2 that night. So anyways, I just wanted to throw that in there, but I didn't mean to take up more time.
No, you're good. That was so good. And I remember that night. That was such a good night. So exciting. Anybody else have something they want to say really quick? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say earlier, when you said you were talking to your therapist and you focus on what that one person thinks about you, it hit me in one of these chapters. It talks about how Satan uses stuff like that to paralyze us. So instead of doing your purpose, you're concentrating on that one thing and you're not moving forward. And so Satan is allowing you to be paralyzed. So, of course, we all know it's easier said than done, but take our eyes off of those around us and put them on him. And then also, I think Ashley Nix knows, but nobody else knows me on this group. So it's nice to meet all of you. But I recently in May left my job of 23 years. And that was a huge step of faith, So I am doing my own business. And last week I shared that this book I wasn't sure was for me, maybe in the future, that kind of thing. But I read on page 76 that, there again, it's that paralyzing lie. And it says that, we allow him to tell us that we're not good enough. We allow him to cue that script to make us disappointed. And later on it says, this is when we get a job to simply make money instead of pursuing our calling to make a difference. And I thought, okay, Lord, this book is for me for now, and I just thank him for always being there in the little details, because that's sometimes where we need him, in the small stuff.
That is so awesome. And it's always the best when he gives you something specific like that. Like, that is exactly your situation. How cool is that he cares and he will give you like the exact words you need to hear. I love that. That is so awesome. Anyone else? If not, next week's chapters are 7, 8, and 9. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 7, 8, and 9. We're going to hear from Julie Courtwright and Ashley next week. And I'm super excited about that. I'll post the chapters in the group page just in case I forget. But just the next 3. Thank you all so much for joining. It means so much to me that you would take time out of your evening to hop on. And I hope it was a blessing to you tonight. And we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye, y'all.